If everyone could find their seats, we will continue with the rest of the panels. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats and we will begin with the rest of the session today. So quiet.
I think they'll hear you.
Okay.
See, I don't want to put it on my phone because I don't like anything on in the background, even though I don't need to shut it off.
Let's, well, we got to get everybody sitting. We have a couple panels coming up there.
So once they get started, I gotta run out because I know shot for your band.
Yeah, to be able to figure it out.
I don't think they want this going out there the whole time.
Okay, folks, if we could get started again, please. If you can grab your seat.
I want to welcome Governor Rick Schneider.
Now, if everyone can grab a seat, we'd appreciate it. I know I've not ever been to a Chinese event where everyone didn't want to congregate and talk. The good part is if we play musical chairs, everyone's going to have a chair. Well, good afternoon. It's great to be with you. I'm Rick Snyder. I'm former governor of Michigan, and I'm happy to have an opportunity to help moderate this panel. Before I do that, I just want to say thank you to the CGCC and PNE in particular for this, and the United States Heartland Association for all their work putting this great event together, because we haven't been able to gather for some time. And it's important that we get together, and it's important we talk and we learn from one another, and this is a fabulous forum to have that happen. So I'm proud to be part of this, and I'm actually looking forward to learning. I'm a proud nerd. So we got an opportunity here to learn from some great mayors, and I hope to the degree you're from China or you're from another part of the United States, you'll get an opportunity to really learn about the heartland of America, the Midwest, from these mayors. They represent what the United States is all about and how our country came about and the values of hardworking people. So I think it's a great opportunity to share, and I've got some questions for them, but hopefully we'll have some time for you guys to ask some questions. So we've got 4 wonderful mayors from 4 different states covered here. So we've got Tito Brown from Youngstown, Ohio. It's great to have you. Chris Coons, yep. Chris Coons from Normal, Illinois, our local guy. Katie Rosenberg from Wausau, Wisconsin. And Jim Havlin from Edina, Minnesota. And to kick things off, I can't do justice to talking about your community, so I think what would be really helpful is to give some people some insight on both your background being mayor, but also tell us about your community. Tell us about the cool things. There's some great reason you're living there and you've been successful there. Why are we fired up to come to Youngstown, Tito? Get us started here.
Well, we don't want to talk about the Buckeyes, and we'll keep that out of the conversation, right?
Please do.
Yes. No, let's not. Let's not. The day has been going so well. First of all, my name is Tito Brown. I'm the mayor of the city of Youngstown, Ohio, and Youngstown is situated just about an hour and a half between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and probably 6 hours from Chicago. So we're right in the middle of everything that's happening. It is what we call a legacy city. It's one of those cities when the steel mills were booming, it was the place to be. It really represented the southern migration for jobs and families, and that was the crust of what was happening there. However, on Black Monday, and when the steel industry just turned upside down, families just left, and the community. One story, gentleman said that he went to school on Friday, and when he got there on Monday, his kids in his class were gone, and he's never seen them since. That's been 50 years, so it's 2027 will be 50 years since the Black Monday for the steel mill leaving the community of like Youngstown, Ohio. But that is our old story. That's not our new story now, but we're moving in such a different direction, kind of really believing that industries are out there for us. So I'll stop there. That's just a little bit about, I'll talk a little bit about where we are now. That's where we were. I will talk a little bit about where we are now in the future conversation. Thank you.
Chris?
Hi. First off, thanks for inviting me. I was quite flattered to be asked to come and talk about a small community in downstate Illinois. Normal, Illinois is a center state. We're Twin Cities with a city called Bloomington. Our population's about 52,000 people. Bloomington's about 78,000. And when I talk, I will talk about in the sense of partnership that the two communities have about how we're moving forward in the 21st century. I've been mayor for 19 years. That makes me a slow learner. We have a philosophy in Normal and in Bloomington that you don't live in great communities. You work to make great communities. And when you go someplace and you see a place that's special, it's because a lot of people did a lot of heavy lifting to get it there. And that's kind of been our philosophy. Our community has changed quite a bit. We were primarily insurance-based with the headquarters of State Farm Insurance, a regional company called Country Financial, also insurance and finances, 2 universities. So we were pretty white-collar and a pretty stable community. But things have changed. The insurance business has changed. And so we had to change. And it's kind of interesting because Normal was looked upon as a university community with a regional healthcare center and no manufacturing. And since I've been mayor and slightly before, most of the manufacturing is now in our community. We have Rivian Automotive that many of you have heard of doing the electric vehicle truck and doing vans for Amazon. They had bought a dead car plant in our community and recreated that. We have a company called Brandt out of Canada. They're the largest manufacturer of agricultural equipment in Canada, and they've located in our community. And Ferraro Chocolate, of all companies from Italy, is making a big presence in our community. And I think a lot of that has to do that they have found a place with a great workforce, with great infrastructure, great opportunity. And we're going to build on that, and we'll talk more about that as we go through.
Great. Katie?
Yeah. Where are they getting their milk? I have an idea of where they could get it. I'm Katie Rosenberg. I'm the mayor of Wausau, Wisconsin. If you know Wisconsin, we're right in the middle of the state. And maybe for this audience, you probably know a lot about American ginseng. We export and grow the most in the nation. We are very well known. One of my favorite stories is about why that became to be. So 100 years ago maybe, we had 2 brothers. They were 12, 13 years old, and they were reading a comic book. And on the back, they were advertising for silver foxes. You could send in and have silver foxes sent to you. And they thought, this is my business idea. I need these foxes. So they went to their parents and they said, hello, I would like these foxes. And they said, well, you're gonna have to work for this. And they said, well, we don't. How are we gonna work for this? And their parents gave them kind of a wild goose chase and said, figure out how to cultivate this wild ginseng here. And so they went out into the woods and they did. They figured it out. They started cultivating it. It became one of their big things. They also got those foxes, so we had lots of fur trading going on back in the day too. So we're big with agriculture. Ginseng is huge. We have a huge dairy industry. We have cranberries, maple syrup, all kinds of different egg. But we also have lots of manufacturing surrounding us. If you've heard of Greenheck fans, that's right there. And a lot of the fabricators that supply Greenheck also have built up around their factory in Wausau. So we have a lot going on. We just turned 150 years old. Hard to believe we've been around that long. So I'm really excited to talk about some of our opportunities to work together with our partners here. We do have 11% of our population is Hmong, so you probably have heard of the Hmong who were our allies during the Vietnam War and the Secret War. So we have lots of diversity in our community. So we would love, if you're ever thinking you'd like to tour our area, we'd love to show you everything we have.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jim Hovland. I'm the mayor of Edina, Minnesota, which is a suburban community, first-ring suburban community, just southwest of Minneapolis. And we are fortunate to be a community that punches way above its weight. We're about the same population as normal, about 54,000. I was just sitting here, incidentally, thinking about the geography here. I just happened to notice that we've gone from the east to the west and now to Minnesota, which is the dead end before you get to Canada, the end of the road.
I thought you were talking about the Vikings.
Yeah, no, we're progressing north to Wisconsin. I wouldn't insult Wisconsin.
Here we go tonight.
No. So anyway, our town is headquarters for many of the CEOs that run our Fortune 500 companies. If you look at Fortune magazine and you look at the Fortune 500 companies, Minnesota has more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any state in the U.S. And most of them are sited in the Twin Cities, and a lot of the CEOs live in our community. We've got a really high level of education. So our location is superb, our school district is superb, and about probably $15–16 billion worth of market value on our property, and we'll be talking more about some of the things that have happened during the pandemic. I'll probably talk a little bit about the effects on our region, because we're really like a big town, including Minneapolis, with the killing of George Floyd, which preceded COVID. And we really got kind of a double whammy in Minnesota between the killing of George Floyd and what happened worldwide with that, and what happened in particular to our economy and our biggest city. And then also with, that was in May of 20, and then in January of 2021, having the first case of COVID discovered in the U.S. and having the pandemic go from there. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rick, and we'll proceed. Thank you.
Oh, well, those were great explanations, and it's wonderful to see. We do have the Great Lakes states represented here, and we do get along. They're picking on each other a little bit, but just to let you know, we got a Buckeye and a Wolverine sitting next to each other. That's pretty good. For
No bloodshed yet. We're good.
in terms of states. In terms of issues, though, one of the things, and I'll go to you, Chris, so we'll sort of rotate this around, is it says reopen for our future. And we're coming out of COVID, and now people are looking to expand in that again and grow. And we have a lot of wonderful Chinese companies, a lot of wonderful companies in general here. What's the pitch you'd make them to come to your town?
Oh, it's the best town in the United States would be the first start. But realistically, there are a lot of assets that we have, and a lot of communities in the Midwest have these, and you're going to hear it from these other mayors. So we're well located within the region. We have 3 interstates that intersect in our community. We have a very vital airport that has flights daily to Chicago, Atlanta, and Detroit. We have 2 Class 1 railroads in our community. We have lots of water, and we have cheap power. So there are just a lot of elements there. And now there are companies, international companies, that have found that in our community and identified that. I will tell you the downside that we're working on is workforce. Workforce is an issue for a lot of communities that are growing. We have Illinois State University, who's starting an engineering program. A whole new school of engineering because there's such a demand for engineers, and that will open in 2025. Heartland Community College is a forefront in leadership on workforce development programs. With Rivian Automotive coming to our community, they thought they would need 1,100 employees. They're cresting to 7,000 employees in our community now. And with the help of the state government in Illinois, Heartland Community College has started 2 programs on battery technology and electric automobile manufacturing. And those programs are taking off. And the other thing I should talk about that we're really known for is agriculture. We're the largest county in the state of Illinois. We have some of the richest farmland in the United States, and we're a huge exporter of soybeans and corn.
Right, Katie?
All right, so Wausau is a great place if you have family. I would think that we've invested early on in our education system, starting right away with our Wausau School District. We have one of the oldest international baccalaureate programs in the nation, so in actually North America. So if you have a family and you want to bring them, they're going to get a great education. And then moving on up, we have a 2-year college, we have a technical college, we have the Medical College of Wisconsin. We have partnerships with the variety of UW colleges. So we have a master's program in business, a bachelor's program in engineering. You can do that all in Wausau. So really great if you have folks who are with you who need education and you want to start a family. But we have lots of opportunity too. We really value entrepreneurship. We have great programs available. We're really good partners with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Just a quick pitch. They got a table out there. Talk to them. We want to talk to you together. But we have a lot of opportunity too. We have some space. We have old legacy buildings that maybe did some things that we no longer need them to do. So paper mills, right? We have those in our region. How do we transition those into something new? How do we ensure that everybody understands ginseng here? I was talking to somebody at lunch about ginseng, and they said, well, actually, I'm more interested in cranberries now. That's what I'm into. Well, we got that too. We have so many cranberry bogs. We have so much opportunity for whatever that is that you're interested in. And we have a big medical campus, a couple of them. We have 3 big medical agencies just right there in Wausau. So whatever it is that you're interested in, we can figure out how to get you injected into the right system. And I know that our wraparound services with education, they are willing to make sure that the workforce is ready too.
I mentioned earlier that Edina is part of this metropolitan region. So this metropolitan region, this 7-county metro area that encompasses Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a great number of suburban communities like Edina. I'm going to answer this question on a more of a regional basis. When we hit the front end of the Great Recession in 2008, the mayors in our metropolitan area, the Regional Council of Mayors, got together with the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota and analyzed what were our strongest economic clusters, because we all know that when you've got strong economic clusters, those clusters tend to go into recession the latest and come out the quickest. And we determined, and I don't know why nobody had done this work before, but we were at the top of the heap in biomedical and med tech and medical device. And so we're right up there with Boston in terms of producing medical devices for the world. We're really strong in finance. We're really strong in water. We're really strong in banking. And we're really strong in logistics and transportation. And so those are these clusters that we started to think about and try to align and make them even stronger than they were. So many of you in this room probably heard about Medical Alley, which is a medical device association that exists in the Twin Cities. So we've been able to think about how to grow this economy of ours. And then Edina is a beneficiary of that, because in Minnesota, because it's so cold, we got this great history of collaboration on everything. So we don't really care what town the business goes to. We just want them in the region because we want our region to prosper. And that means our state is going to prosper, because we produce about 74% of our state GDP is produced in that metropolitan area.
Tito, tell us about Youngstown.
First of all, it's the people. You will never find the more inviting. And Youngstown say we invented grit. We are tough and will endure the tough times, but we're also inviting. We look about relationships, and if you get a chance to visit Youngstown, and I'll speak from the city economy, then our county economy, but then we talk about our regional economy. At one point, we were all operating in different silos, and now I call it the team arrivals, and now we're all together, and we've made trips to Washington together, we've made trips to Columbus, Ohio together. We've made sure that when we go and make an ask, it's one ask and one voice, but when we come back, we decide which piece of the puzzle that we can play a part in. We have Youngstown State University, which is one of our top universities in the state of Ohio, but also we have our community college, our Eastern Gateway Community College, and we are really realizing that there's ultimately there's opportunities for the workforce, but we're getting ready for it. We're making sure that the industries that are out there, we know that sustainable EV, is sustainable energy is out there. It's not a matter if it's coming, it's that it's there. We have the old Lordstown plant, we've returned that to now building electric vehicles as well. Multiple models are there, but then we have Altium Cell is the other opportunity that's happening there. And it's amazing that we're just talking about electric batteries, and I was in China, and it was like they're on your third and fourth generation. But the excitement here in the community is right in the middle. They're ready to go. They like what's going on. But I think if you're looking for a place where you say, the cost of living, the cost of doing business, and the last thing is that we're open for business. We're open for anyone who wants to come and do business in our community that will benefit our community, and we can have a great partnership. Youngstown, Ohio, the Mahoney Valley, or the Voltage Valley is the place to come.
Great. Well, I appreciate all those perspectives. A lot of times when you get a panel, you get really nice questions and really simple things. I want to ask a tougher question, just so you can get some perspective. And it came up earlier on the survey when they went through the survey results on talking to Chinese companies and such. One of the concerns is about relations between the two countries and feeling about one another. And so one of the questions that I always had, I made 8 trips to China. I made a trip every single year as governor to build relationships. But I would go back and tell communities the size of all these fine communities here that I can help get people excited, Chinese organizations that's excited about your community, but if they don't feel welcome by you, they're not going to come. And so for all the Chinese companies and the Chinese representatives here, I'd just like to go down the panel and sort of say, are Chinese companies going to be welcome in your town? And what kind of response are you going to get? Because let's just be honest and put that on the table. So, you ready to take that one on, Katie?
I guess it's me. My answer is heck yes. We want to welcome you. We have been working hard on becoming a more welcoming community. We actually just opened our first refugee office in 20 years because we needed to welcome more people. That's frankly it. We need more people moving. I think the whole Midwest we're seeing, we need more people coming in and partnering with us. So yes, we're all working on being more welcoming together. We have opportunities to get together and face your government, mingle with folks. You are more than welcome. Do you want me to keep going? Because I will.
No, that's good. We'll keep.
Okay.
Minnesota has this wonderful history with China. They just celebrated the end of November a 40-year relationship, a sister province sort of relationship with Shanxi province, Shanxi, I think, Shanxi province. At the University of Minnesota, there's been a China Center since 1979. There's an average of about 4,000 Chinese students that come to the University of Minnesota per year. And I think nationwide there's probably about 380,000 Chinese students in the United States doing higher education work. We've only got, when I looked at the data from our trade office, we've only got 16 Chinese companies doing business in Minnesota with all those Fortune 500 companies that we have there. But we have 60 companies that are doing work in China. And so we've got this history together, we've built this foundation together over 40 years, and it's like we're underperforming together. And so when I saw that data from Abby, when she made her presentation, I was really, my heart just kind of sank. I thought, oh boy, one more issue to deal with, and that's what we all deal with as mayors, one challenge after another. Here's another challenge. And geopolitics can affect life, but also the kinds of things that we're doing in this room can affect geopolitics in a positive way, because a lot of life is built on relationships. It's built on relationships between people. It's built on respect between people. And we can do that, and we should be doing that. And so for those of us in Minnesota, I say, hey, what hasn't happened from this great sort of friendship that's been built over 40 years? Why aren't we making more out of that? And we should be, together, figuring that out together.
How about I just say ditto? No.
That's Minnesota nice for you.
Yes. No, the real short is yes, we're open. I think I mentioned earlier about being inviting, but there's a realization right now that you've got to diversify those who live in your community. You've got to have an open mind, and I truly believe in Youngstown, Ohio. We don't necessarily subscribe to the national narrative or the state narrative or even the county narrative. We subscribe to our own narrative. For me, it's we're focusing on now a regional repopulation of opening our doors and who wants to come to live in the community where we have a great college town. And I didn't even start talking about the food and the fun that we have at Friday nights at the football game. So those are some of the greatest things that we have. But I also like to dig in a little bit about my being personal about it. I'm the 51st mayor of the city of Youngstown, and I'm probably the first mayor that's ever taken a trip over to China and realized to open your mind to other than just your state and your walls. So I Governor, as you said when you got back, there was let me be very honest. There was some hesitation when I said I wanted to go, and I talked to my family and my friends, and I talked to my staff. And when I came back, I couldn't stop talking about my trip, how much of a great of an opportunity I had, the time I had over there. And listen, the food, wow. That's all I can say is wow. So we want to bring that. I want my community to feel that excitement, but also to break down those barriers that have been there for so long, the years in past. So yes, we're ready to go.
Our community is a community that was built on immigration. My family came from Ireland and Germany to escape incredibly awful living conditions and settled in. And on the Irish side, they were not welcome in the community. But today they prosper in our community, the descendants of those people. I'll tell a story about Mitsubishi Motors, who built the car plant in our community. And it was a very competitive scenario. We were competing with Indiana and Ohio for the location, and there were a lot of dollars on the table at that time. And Mitsubishi ended up choosing Normal as their location. And everybody said it's because Illinois had the best incentive package. Well, I got to be very good friends with Waco, who was part of the decision making and came to Bloomington Normal with his wife, who had come from Tokyo, and they had great trepidation about coming to our community. But Waco, years after, told me that the reason they chose Normal is because it was welcoming and safe. And they were bringing a lot of Japanese people into central Illinois, and they were very concerned about that. They felt so safe in that community that Waco and Masako had lived in Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles, and Normal, Illinois. Waco passed away a few years ago in Normal, Illinois. Masako is still there, and they said this is the community they love. And that's the kind of community we are. We have passed a welcoming ordinance in our community that very strongly says, if you want to be in our community and prosper, you're welcome. We welcome you, and we will help you and embrace you when you come.
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing that, because again, that's just something we need to talk about, these issues, because there are some national differences, but you can see their hearts are in this in terms of really want to build relationships with people in this audience. Another question I'd ask is sort of along those lines, but somewhat easier, I think, is in terms of success stories where someone has come from out of town. You've talked about some of the big companies, but this isn't just about having that premier deal, but many of the companies here have suppliers, supply chain companies that may bring 20 jobs, 50 jobs, 100 jobs into your community. That's a big deal. Where if you show up in a major metro area and they say, we're going to bring 50 jobs to Chicago, yeah, so part of this is talk about, what are the things that really stand out. And one of the things I'll give you a plug to all of you is one of the things I found that attracting businesses, not just from foreign places, but from places in the U.S., is there's something about the Midwest and the heartland and the work ethic of the people that I could get jobs to come from the East Coast and the West Coast because when they had a job, they would just change to the next job that came along that paid them a little bit more rather than sticking with a company because they had a relationship. So tell me a success story or so.
We've got, I was just sitting here thinking, we've got all these CEOs from these big companies like Cargill and Ecolab and Target and other places living in our community. But our community, Edina, is built on small business and all these small business successes. And the most recent thing we did now is we just set up an Edina Innovation Lab where we're going to take businesses that are not at the front end of an idea, but have got some traction and have got a little life to them and help boost them to the next level. So that's one of the things that we've been working on that I think is really something to be thoughtful and proud of. Our Chamber of Commerce has been working on this diligently because their whole model of how they operate has changed. And so this Innovation Lab is a big part of what they're doing. On a broader basis, I see a workforce in the Twin Cities that's really highly educated. We've got the lowest unemployment rate in the country in Minnesota because of the businesses that we have there. We may have some workforce challenges like everybody else, but we're constantly thinking about how we're going to educate our young people and get them to the next level. So I think that Innovation Lab is at least one idea that I would talk about, and there are other small business stories we can talk about. We've got some folks in our town that took an old plant that was outside of Edina that was making woolen goods. It's called Faribault Woolen Mill. I don't know if you ever heard of Faribault Woolen Mill, but they've been around since the Civil War. And it had closed up, and they reopened it during the Great Recession, and the people that live in our town have just enjoyed tremendous success from this with all of the retail operations that they've opened up and other things that they've been doing. So that's just one thing on the retail side. So thanks for that.
I think what I'll talk about is the success that's going to happen in the state of Ohio and how places like Youngstown, Ohio can benefit. We talk about the Intel chips that's going to happen in Columbus, Ohio. Now, Columbus, Ohio is about 2 hours away from the company. But the problem is going to be that Columbus is going to be competing for the workforce. But the bigger thing for us is going to be supply chain. Who's going to be working? Who's going to be producing or providing the supply chain for Intel in Columbus, Ohio? Well, Youngstown, Ohio, we have advanced manufacturing, but probably have one of the greatest 3D printing opportunities that we have. Our university, our community college, as well as our school systems haven't gotten together and put together what we call an innovation center, and that's where they're teaching the next generation on 3D and advanced manufacturing. So I think that's going to really be good for us, because if you're a business and your supply chain, you got to compete with Columbus, and let me tell you, Andy Ginther, the mayor of Columbus, is a tough dude, and they get companies will fall in their lap. But the problem is going to be, you get the one employee is going to work from one place to another. But if you start looking at the dollars that you'll spend in Youngstown, Ohio versus the number of dollars you'll spend in Columbus, Ohio, I think you'll get more bang for your buck when you look for employees, but also land and site readiness. And we just most recently took some of our American Rescue Plan dollars and placed and matched our public dollars with private dollars for our Chamber of Commerce to now find out what sites are you really looking for from the city of Youngstown. So we're doing site ready. I used to think, well, they want a place. Here's where they need the old steel mill. Well, no, we're getting more sophisticated and really focusing on here's what they need, here's what kind of employees they need, and here's where they need to be located. So we've taken that extra step to take our private money and put it with our public dollars so that we'll have site-ready locations. And I think the chip Intel will be a big thing for us because the supply chain will be a little further away to be more competitive.
I think focusing back to that welcoming community idea, I'm trying to think of one, but I keep thinking of many. I think of a younger man a few years ago who opened a Mexican restaurant, now has 6 Mexican restaurants. I'm thinking about 2 doctors who didn't know each other that were doctors in Iran when that government fell and came here in the 70s and had to go to medical school again. And they met in Bloomington Normal and started a practice which became a very good practice and developed a medical device that's internationally known for pain relief. And they did it in that community because I think the people in the community were welcoming that kind of business, that kind of entrepreneurship. We work on that now through our Economic Development Council, our Small Business Development Center, to help people who want to start small businesses, because those are really the core of the business community. You look at the statistics on small businesses in the United States, they employ 80% of the people in this country. And they add vitality, a unique sense of place is what they bring. So we encourage that in our community. We want that, we want that that multicultural influence to thrive in our community.
Agreed, 100%. We have so many small businesses. We really do relish that entrepreneurship, and we too have a lot of these similar stories where somebody maybe shows up and they go to our business incubator and they learn how to do their thing really well, and they open their first business, and then all of a sudden a few other cities want them to open the same thing there. So we have a couple stories like that too. I would say, we now just opened up a new facility that manufactures fire trucks, and those are $1 million trucks for a city. I'm sure all the mayors know this. It is so expensive, and we have them built right here in Wausau, right up there, 5 hours. But we have a lot of different opportunities for folks who have all kinds of different interests. Again, the Medical College of Wisconsin is right here. We're training tomorrow's doctors every day. It's really a wonderful thing to have that environment, and they're focused on maybe different kinds of medicine, rural medicine, street medicine, whatever that is. They're doing all kinds of different things. So I think that we really have thrived because of welcoming people from out of town. I mean, Wausau was founded from a guy who came over from Germany and loved it so much that he went back to Germany, recruited 700 of his favorite friends, and they all came back together and they voted him mayor. So, that's kind of who we are, and we have a lot of stories like that. A lot of people want to, that's, it's kind of a good idea, but I'm from Wausau, so I, just have to make friends there. So.
Great. Well, I appreciate all those. Thank you. So I want the audience to have an opportunity to ask a couple questions. And while you're thinking of a question you'd like to ask, I just mentioned something I mentioned to the panel, and I'm not going to put them on the spot. But we've talked a lot about how we can work together, because I did spend a lot of time going to China and working with Chinese government officials and private officials. But one of the things I'd encourage them to think about, I did encourage them, is there a sister city relationship or a partner relationship that could happen? Because it's not just about jobs, it's about the cultural side of things. So to those of you from China, you should think about if you might have a community that might be a good match, or if they're part of a province with their state, give it some ideas to say, is there something that would be a good combination where I mentioned to them, they may be communities of 40 to 60,000, but if you get a Chinese sister city, it may be a town of 5 million.
Bring it.
So there's probably a pretty good chance you might get some good economic development in addition to making some new friends. Because we had fabulous province-state relationships at the Michigan level. Questions from the audience? Somebody have a question out there? We've got one in the back.
Yeah, as part of developing an FDI strategy, about how much do you spend at the city or at the economic development level thinking about your FDI strategy, and about what percentage of the budget are you going to spend in pursuing a strategy?
And let me just interpret for those of you that don't know FDI, it's foreign direct investment. So we've got somebody that's obviously a professional in the field, but do you have some resources that are looking to get foreign direct investment?
I would say yes. Our regional chamber, we spent quite a bit of time for that, and I'll say this, and I'll make it real brief. Before I became mayor, and I talked about the silos, and it's been 5 years. we've had to build that relationship because the chamber would make their trips or they would make their decisions without having the city at the table, and now we're at the table when these decisions are made. I mentioned that we've done fly-ins to DC together, we've done fly-ins to Columbus together, but we also, when I first got the invite to come here, that was the second call that I made. The first was asking my wife if I could come, and the second was asking the chamber if what should we bring to share with the companies that are here. But they've talked about their investment and the things that they're doing. So we're now, as a partnership level, working on that.
I'd say we're probably a little more opportunistic and nimble in that regard. We don't really budget. It's part of our thought philosophy in that. We work very closely with our local economic development council. Our CEO is in the audience here today. So I think Ferraro Chocolates is an example of a company. And what happens is when somebody shows an interest, we light up and we go on fire. And we focus on that if we think that's a good interest. And we tell them that we're ready, we're nimble, talk to us, tell us what you need. We'll tell you very clearly what we expect as a new business in our community, and try to make your path as easy as possible to be in our community. So we're small enough that we really don't have a FDI strategy, but when it comes, we're on it.
Now, Chris, I behaved really well, but I got to pick on you on one item, if that's okay.
Yep.
And that's the issue of, if you really want to get the audience, why don't you have a piece of chocolate? You've been promoting this chocolate
where's our
place.
chocolate?
I mean,
No.
there should be chocolate out here for everybody,
one's
shouldn't there?
We've also got beer nuts in our community too.
Okay.
Yeah,
Katie?
so this is actually not something that we budget for either. This is new to us, but we are open. We have great partnerships with our state economic development folks. We have our own department. We have a great relationship with the chamber. We have a couple different chambers among Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce. We really want to work together. So if people are interested, we want to figure out how to make that happen. We work aggressively to make it happen. We probably have ginseng samples out there.
Our foreign direct investment strategy is developed, as it is in Wisconsin and other states, at the state level and also at the regional level through our regional economic development entity called Greater MSP. But I will tell you, as I sit here and thought about that question, I'm thinking all four of us are engaged in foreign direct investment.
Okay.
We took our time to come here to tell you that we want to develop relationships with you and your companies and help people prosper, both in China and here. And to me, that is a direct form of investment that we're making here. We're here to tell you that we are prepared to do the things that are necessary to build those relationships that will last many generations. You know, your country has been in existence for centuries and centuries. Ours, not so long, really, relative to China. And when you think about this exponential rate of growth, this exponential curve that we're on, where really this is probably the slowest rate of change any of us are ever going to see, the way things are going. And so what that does to me, it shrinks things. It shrinks the world. It shrinks the planet we live on, so that countries become like neighborhoods. And I don't know how you feel about your neighborhood, but I like getting along with my neighbors. I like having a good relationship with my neighbors. And I think we should all be thinking about that we're really more like big neighborhoods. And it's true that we're competitive with each other because we're the two greatest economies in the world. But there are things that we should be doing together that would cause us both to be more prosperous. And we need to think hard about that and be careful about that and pay attention to it.
Great answers. And we had a question here. Yes, sir. They got a mic coming here.
Thank you, Governor. And I want to appreciate Mayor Brown. As a Chinese, food matters to me. I'm very happy that you like our food. Thank you so much. And I'm as an architect, I'm architect, and Perkins will provide the best quality hospital design. And my question for you are, during the pandemic, especially in the very beginning, we have the CDC requires have like 6 feet to each other. And after the pandemic, how much the pandemic influenced the city regulation for the planning? And so, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
How about, Jim, you want to? Oh, about, did the rules change during the pandemic for planning, for zoning, for how people operate, given the rules of the pandemic? About having business come, I generally don't think they did in most places. But
Yeah, no,
that was his
I
question.
was thinking about anything that we might have done from a zoning standpoint or anything else that affected us during COVID. What happened in Edina during COVID, like probably every other place, is that retail all of a sudden just completely dried up. And so for the retailers, there was a lot of stress. And people were wondering, are people ever going to come back to brick and mortar facilities and shop? Well, in our town, it's totally rebounded. And we're really grateful for that. So as we think about the theme of this conference, we're right there. In 2022, Edina had the highest level of economic development it's had in its history. We've had $400 million worth of property building permit revenue issued. And so our retail stores are full. There's all kinds of prosperity there, despite the kind of worries about the economy right now. But we didn't change anything but try to support our businesses and our people with CARES Act money. With we spent less of that on government than we did on people, and we spent quite a bit of it in conjunction with our school district on making sure that our education system was as stable as possible. And then with the ARPA money that came through, we did the same thing. So we've tried to keep our people working and housed and fed, and so that everybody can prosper. And that's, I think, been a strategy that's worked pretty well, and we're seeing it manifest itself now with the way we've rebounded.
One of the things we really became was more flexible for the outside dining, you know, the connection, the several things, the small business who didn't have a banking relationship, we've worked on putting those banking relationships together, but also those businesses who said, I would come back if I had this or that, and we try to help them do that. So just the flexibility, even in our downtown, we're seeing a slow gradual push and pickup. But even in City Hall, we don't necessarily, one of the bigger changes, you don't necessarily have the flow where you can come and go as before. You come and go as you please. We've kind of put some regulations on when you come in, who you want to see. So there have been some changes there, but as it relates to zoning, when we have business owners who are asking for more space, for variance, we typically are like, okay, I can understand why now you need a variance. Before pandemic, we were like, no, you can't get one. Now we're like, all right, I see why you need one. So yeah, if that was something help you with your question.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
On any given day, in a city, 50% of the people in the community are either annoyed or mad at the mayor. I run a good city. During the COVID years, 100% of the people were annoyed and angry at the mayor. Why isn't that person wearing a mask? Why are you making me wear a mask? Why is that business open? My business is closed. So it was a tough time, but it really gave us some opportunity to learn some things about the community. We took dollars that we received from the state, and we almost exclusively gave it to the small businesses that were most impacted by it. As you said, Tito, that changing zoning regulations for restaurants, COVID made them identify, hey, people like eating outside. And it's like, you're just not figuring this out? So we were resilient, we were firm. I think people respected that, but we were resilient, respectful, and tried to do what we could do to make everybody's life a little better.
Well, the year I was born, the Wausau Mall opened, and the mayor at the time had it right in the middle of our downtown. So it had been slowly dying probably over the last 10 years, but obviously once COVID hit, it was all over. So last year we bulldozed that mall, and now we are completely rebuilding it, and that's given us opportunity to weigh, what should a thing look like over the next 50 years? What should we be doing? What should we be doing for people? So that's really, it's kind of changed some of the things that we're aiming for, right? we talk about the flexibility in policy making. We're doing all that. That's great. That probably should have been done way before, but I'm just glad to be part of that now. But I would say too, we're thinking more about HVAC systems, right? How to keep people healthy, and we have Green Hag right there. Why weren't we thinking about this the whole time? But we're thinking a lot more about some of those things to make sure our buildings are safe for people from whatever comes next. I'm hoping we don't have to deal with this, but you never know, do you?
Yeah, well, we're about out of time, so I'd just give you a closing comment. We have another mayor.
Mayors aren't allowed to ask questions, I heard.
So I assume that means we can go into overtime.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank all the mayors for being here, and I also want to thank CGCC for inviting mayors in general. We all know that we are what the state offers as home for not just businesses, but for the residents that live in our areas. And I know that in Indiana, we've begun to change the definition of economic development. It's no longer going out and trying to find the biggest business to come to be and happen to be in Elkhart, which is where I'm from. But it's really creating quality of place, quality of life, relationships. And I heard Mayor Hoven talk a little bit about that, and it'd be nice to hear a little bit about how in each of your communities, how you are building those initiatives to develop quality of place. I call it stickiness in Elkhart. How do we create opportunities for people to come and live, but not just live, but stay, grow, and enjoy themselves in Elkhart. So when businesses come, they literally know that this is a community that not only do they love, but they realize that we're creating a place in and of itself that keeps them there. And I think it's very important for investors to understand that quality of place, those social cultural issues as it relates to our communities are that important to you.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and that's the mayor of Elkhart, Indiana. And so we'll give a chance for an answer, but this is the lightning round now because we're getting the hook from the other side. So 30 seconds.
I would say arts and entertainment. That's a big piece. Arts and entertainment is a great attraction for any individual, any community. That when you get there, that's a attraction for people.
Developing that sense of place, the uniqueness, arts, entertainment, food. I'm throwing you a bone with some meat on it. We developed a place that's very unique, and we hear this all the time. And Mayor, you just created another session, so I'm going to stop there.
So I guess I could pile on to the arts and entertainment and food. We all got it. But we have great outdoors. We have a great ski hill. I already heard from somebody here who skis in Wausau, so shout out to them. But we also have great snowshoeing, all the things. So if you want to be outdoors and meet people, recreation, we got it.
I think everybody wants to feel like they belong somewhere, that they have a sense, as Chris said, a sense of place, a place that they belong. And so that's what I think every town is trying to do, is create that sense of place and have a town that people love living in and interacting in with their neighbors and people around their community. And it's one of the most important jobs for a mayor. And so thanks for raising that question. I think it's really critically important.
And a place they're proud of.
And thanks for great questions, some great answers. Just to sort of wrap things up, though, one thing I would share with the panel and all of you is one of the special things that comes about it. This isn't just about attracting jobs or economic things. This is about building relationships. And one of the key things is it's a Chinese concept that we don't do real well in America quite often, is the idea of old friends. And so as you listen to these fabulous people that are representing the heartland of America, these aren't your big city folks. These are folks that have wonderful communities or nearby the big city, but they're bringing a set of values that I think you could really interact with. So I would encourage you to interact with these folks during the rest of today and beyond. And as you talk to them, look them in the eye and say, is this someone that could become an old friend? That could be a long-term relationship. Penny and I have been old friends for over a decade, and a number of other people. Those are special things that transcend just economics. So I would encourage you to do these interactions outside of this session So please do so. And the last thing I'd say is let's give a big round of applause. These guys were great. They're wonderful. They were great people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick, and all the mayors. That was great. Appreciate it. Now let's welcome Pin Nee, the chairman of CGCC Chicago, who will moderate the China Outlook 2023 for the U.S.
My daughter's here tomorrow. She's at U Chicago. We organized a little bit. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, so they're on
So, yeah, she's taking finals now. So she has no technique. I'll see her on Saturday.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the good thing about doing it before actually there are some schools that's related. It comes out for
So, okay, let's have set. So at least the good news is that we have more people inside than outside right now. So thank you. And before we get started for our panel, I just want to say a special thanks to the old friend and who traveled to China more than I do. And it is very true, Governor. It is very true. I recall, Governor Snyder has been a great support to CGCC Chicago for many years. And I recall the first Gala we had, Governor came and he did a wonderful speech. Sorry, today we didn't give you that power, He did a wonderful speech, and after that, I got a few Chinese companies reach out, say, we got to move to Michigan. And I say, okay, how can I help you? They say, we just want to see, get connected with the governor and so on and so on. So after that, I recall 3 companies immediately moved their manufacturing facility, set up their manufacturing facility in Michigan. And the governor went for a couple of them, I think, for the ribbon cutting. So that just shows how important the communication could go. And obviously, so thank you, Governor, now we have more choices. And we could have a little more competition as well, so that's good. Okay, so our panel is about what's going to happen in China next year. And when we prepared this gala, we did a little survey among our members. Everybody asked the same question, what's going to happen in China? Because there are so many things have changed. Not in the last few months, you can talk about what happened, or last few weeks, you can talk about the 20th Party Congress meeting, or last few hours, talking about the COVID policy. So nevertheless, I'm very honored to have our expert in, who are, study about what's going to happen in China. And so I think this is a good time for us to ask our panelists to give us, show us their crystal ball. So anyway, so maybe each of you can introduce yourself and also give, just general perspective about what could happen in China. Then I have a lot of questions I collected already from our members. So John, maybe start from you.
Thanks, Ben. This is working? Great. It's super fun to see you. It's the last time we saw each other was at the CGCC meeting in January 2020 in New York, right before COVID hit. That's the last meeting of this sort that I attended. And one other little note, if you're thinking about investing in the United States, there's a movie to watch called American Factory. It's about Fuyao glass. I was involved with Fuyao. I know Cao Wang very, very well. And I was thinking about the movie recently because one of the filmmakers, Julia Reichert, just passed away, unfortunately. But anyway, it's a great movie, and to learn a lot from it. I don't have a crystal ball for China. And in fact, if you'd asked me a month ago where we'd be today, I would have been wrong, because things have changed. The world is changing fast. U.S.-China relations is evolving. We're trying to figure out how to deal with one another. We're trying to figure out what areas of technology are off limits to investment. China is trying to figure out how to deal with the pandemic going forward, because this represents a massive challenge. And I think on a broad scale, I'd like to refer to, Dali is familiar with the concept of Fang and Shou in Chinese cycles, which is, you call it kind of loosening or expansionary policies, Fang, and then Shou, sort of consolidation or retrenchment or controls. And China's really been on a long-term cyclical control mode for quite a number of years. I won't go into details exactly when and why, but my question, I think, going forward is it going to open up more? Are the controls and the openness going to be, once again, the major themes that drive China in the years to come? So I'll just open with that, those brief comments. I look forward to the questions from you all. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion. First of all, I guess thank you very much, Pin, for inviting us to be here, and congratulations to CGCC for putting on an amazing conference here and inviting some great speakers. So I've really enjoyed the mayor's conversation and the discussion about climate. It's interesting to hear John talk about this, the great arc of time. I've been doing business in China since kind of the mid-'80s and 90s, and I've sort of seen the various arcs. And I would say, a lot of us foreigners that went to China in that time period, in the early time period, were really struck by, the optimism, the enthusiasm, that entrepreneurial spirit, the level of cooperation, and it's infectious. It's infectious. It just, when you go there and you feel that energy, I don't want to be too much of a downer, but a lot of that enthusiasm has now waned. I think that's a massive understatement. I'll make a couple of comments just about, and as far as the crystal ball going forward, that's pretty difficult. I can make a few comments about the here and the now, what's going on, especially with American companies in China today. What are they thinking? And because I just came back from China, I spent the last 19 years living in Shanghai, mostly as a banker. I used to work for HSBC and then joined the Chamber of Commerce. So I'll start with some reaction to the CGCC survey. The American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai does a similar survey going the other way, asking American companies what they're thinking in China. And what was interesting, listening to the survey results, is how similar they are. So one is number one, government regulation, it's and legal and compliance issues. I mean, those are always, and so the point being pretty much the same. It's like what American companies are thinking there is kind of the same as what Chinese companies are saying here. And we want to be welcome. Companies just want to be welcome in a community. That's spot on. What's changed is the optimism level. And we've been doing that survey for about 25 years. The latest results are the optimism level has hit the lowest level in the history of the survey. And so a lot of different reasons for that, but I'll stop there. But also can make, as we get into our discussion, we can talk about what companies are staying, what companies are leaving, and what their actions are, especially around supply chain. But I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ping, for bringing me onto this panel. I'm really great to see. I think. Okay, I should just turn it on. And it's really great to be back in this room as well. So it's been a while. And I want to build on what John and Ke have mentioned. In many ways, actually, these are two veterans in U.S.-China relations in particular. So in the arc of history, clearly, we got carried away. We got used to the era of 10-year visas, frequent travel. You just accumulating all those miles and so on. And in a way, when we think back, actually it's sort of as the controls and so on are being introduced, in some ways actually we are simply going back to a little bit of an earlier era. However, there is a big difference. The big difference is there were, for example, right before the pandemic, 360,000 Chinese students in the United States. Today, there are still 300,000, right? So sort of, there is actually the contrast, however, is there were 10,000 American students in China around before the pandemic. And I would urge you to actually guess how many American students remain in China today. It's about 300 also. And that's actually the kind of contrast. It's in this context, the fun and show the actually relaxation and the retrenchment and or re-centralization that we talk about, especially in terms of not only actually sort of the big US-China relations, but also within China. But Pien has asked me to speak a little bit about the really sort of how do we think about, especially because the pandemic has been so foremost on our minds for the last year in particular. Of course, last year, remember, there was euphoria in China. Right? At the beginning of 2021, in particular, there was a lot of euphoria within China that China was winning, the West was declining, and declining fast. Right? And then, of course, came Omicron, came this year. And I want to actually offer a little bit of an overview and also looking back, because therein lies actually the logic behind what is happening today, actually. So in March this year, the Chinese leadership really talked about balancing economic growth and pandemic controls, using, especially calling for minimizing the cost of pandemic controls while boosting economic growth. And it's in this context, Shanghai, in March in particular, as Omicron began to sweep into Shanghai, began to test, to carry out some sort of a precision targeted approach. That was vetoed. And it was vetoed in such a way that lockdown was imposed on this city of 26 million. Some of you actually were locked down there for quite a bit of time as well. And of course, as a result, there was not only shortages, but starvation actually in a city that's the Shanghai people never imagined it could happen, right? So sort of. But there was one revelation from the Shanghai experience, namely with Omicron, precision targeted pandemic control or 防控 actually cannot really work. If Shanghai cannot do it, the rest of China, or most of the rest of China, could not do it. And then come the 20th Party Congress. Of course, before the Party Congress is politics. And of course, localities bend backwards actually trying to satisfy the goal of pandemic control. But after that, the leadership decided we have to pull back from these stringent controls, the lockdowns, the fact that there were some families that were locked in from the outside and so on, and of course then came the fire. But in fact, if you think about actually the reopening today in China, I want you to think back not to the end of November. You think back to actually November 11th or so, because it's then the Chinese government, the health authorities issued the new 20 articles for precision 防控 or controls actually on pandemic. Remember, the Shanghai experience has already shown that you cannot control actually the Omicron variant using precision measures. And then the national government decides to do it. So even though they still called for controlling the pandemic, if you really look back, and I saw that as the pivot to an effort to reopen, but slow it down in the process. And if you think about that, and then came, including actually there are student protests, worker protests, and especially in Guangzhou and so on, and then suddenly there was this quick turn over the last 2 weeks in particular, right? But of course, when we think back to November 11th to today, it's almost about a month now. And now suddenly, for most people thinking about actually early December as the reopening, of course, it appears to be so sudden. But if you think back to November 11th, it's actually a little bit of a more gradual process in a way, actually, in terms of introduction. But still, though, a lot of localities not prepared for the avalanche of cases, right? And BF7 is particularly contagious. It's actually sort of, and because China is loosening controls in the time that this virus is spreading, actually it's going to spread much faster than people had anticipated. In fact, I see all those friends in Beijing and so on, they are beginning to catch it today, actually. So this is going to be a process. It's going to be a challenging process over especially the next probably 3 months in particular, because China is not just about Beijing, right? So different localities still have variations in policies, but it's going to cascade through different parts of the country. So that, in fact, there are some parts of the country that basically say, let's get over it. We want it to be fast because BF7 is so short in incubation, and you just develop some symptoms, and for most young people, you just get over it. But of course, there are going to be significant impact on the elderly and so on. And in fact, many people may not actually have adequate time to get vaccinated or boosted in particular. So that's the challenge. But of course, since we are looking at next year, therefore, clearly, given the circumstances, by next spring, things will look very different compared to today. But I think we should really tighten the seatbelt in looking at what's happening in China, especially over the next few weeks, because people have not really gotten a sense of what would happen at this point, even though this is a much wilder virus now, but at the same time, the number of people who are going to catch it. And also, I do want to mention, it's also likely that the flu may be mingled, and most Chinese are not vaccinated for the flu at all, actually. So there is going to be a significant challenge health-wise over the next few months. But at the same time, this country, I think, in summary, China was exhausted physically, mentally, with zero COVID, especially over the last year. So there is actually, the sentiments have turned dramatically over the last 24 months. So this is a country that's really ready for this challenge in a way, mentally. But still, there are going to be a lot of people will be surprised. And at the same time, clearly, we are looking at a better country in terms of the circumstances, in terms of the optimal level, but it will get worse probably in the meantime for a little bit before it gets better probably by next summer. And travel, I do want to emphasize, clearly we are relaxed if they can manage this sort of relatively, I guess, sort of effectively.
Can I just add a comment?
Yeah, so since Professor Yang already answered my question, and actually, you know, it's interesting, I saw in China, people talking about the best medication for COVID in China was the World Cup. And, but we come back to that topic. I think, you know, since we're going to leave all the political question to the ambassador panel as well, so we're going to focus on the business. So from business perspective, you know, there's a lot of concern about China's economy probably slowing down very dramatically. I have a couple of data, you know. Just November, China's exporting dropped 8.7%. And biggest drop since February 2020 when China started, you know, the COVID lockdown. And then the auto sector dropped 9.5%. So there's a variety of issues, you know, for example, this real estate market, and there are going to be $30 billion debt coming due, and with $10 billion is denominated in the US dollar. So there are concerns about, you know, where China's economy is. Obviously, you know, the COVID policy will help to change a lot of things. But on the other side, you know, there's from some expert related, you know, looking at China's economy, they believe that in 2023, China's large and mid-cap company are expect to have 17.3% profit increase, which is wonderful. It's a double-digit increase. So anyway, this is a curve for you. As you know, most of the people are U.S. company are in China. What do you hear from those American companies in China today? What is their plan, and what do they, think they're going to do in China? Are they going to keep investing, or they're going to pull back? We hear a lot of controversial, debate and a very mixed signal. Some people are saying, hey, I'm going to be Warren Buffett. Everybody is scared. I'm going to be greedy. But a lot of people say it's not worth my time because I don't want to travel there because I don't know if I'm going to get locked down there and then never be able to come back. So anyway, I just wanted you share what you heard. You've been in China for that long, and you've been the head of the chamber in Shanghai. So, the good news, you got out of there before they locked it down. So.
Sure, I'll make a couple of comments about that. And actually, I'm probably going to put my banker hat back on. I used to work for HSBC as a banker, and so I'd be a little bit careful about the numbers about revenue versus profit expansion. I think you are going to actually see a lot of profit this year, even though you don't actually see the revenue growth, and that's because the lockdown actually is a function of the lockdown, right? The lockdown actually cuts your costs. So you're going to see some companies that actually have more profit this year than ever before, but they're not going to see the revenue expansion. As far as GDP growth is concerned, what most of the foreign companies are looking at in terms of the Chinese market, yes, I think because of, we'll get to the property thing in a minute, but just looking at the sort of 5 to 10 year outlook, looking at the China market, we are never going to see the 8 to 12% GDP growth that we've been accustomed to looking at China. That is not going to happen ever again, mainly because of demographics, right? So the labor force is shrinking, so that's going to have an impact on GDP growth, and also it's going to have already had a big impact in terms of the types of companies, types of businesses that are going to be investing in China. I'm sort of looking at China in terms of like a nice about a 3 to 5% GDP growth number annually going forward for the foreseeable. That sounds disappointing. It's not. When you think about 3% GDP growth on top of an economy the size of China, what we're talking, that is economic activity that's roughly the size of France. So we're talking about adding a France to the balance sheet in each year in China going forward. So that's a key point, and that's one of the reasons why you're not going to see the foreign companies, the large foreign companies. You are not seeing any of them abandoning the market. That number is zero. Zero large companies are moving out of China from a market point of view. This is still going to be the largest growth market for most companies going forward. And also, just a quick point, also going back to the point about the CGCC survey, one of the things I took out of that, just listening to the numbers that Abby Lee mentioned, is it's clear to me from looking at those numbers that the American market is actually not as important to the Chinese companies as the Chinese market is to American companies. What do I mean by that? So GM is selling more cars by volume in China than it does in the United States. Coca-Cola, everything from cars to cat food, that is the largest market. And the large multinationals are not abandoning it. What is, and you're seeing even with U.S.-China tensions and the export controls, you're still seeing the large companies make adjustments to continue selling in China, even though they need to comply to U.S. export controls. For example, the NVIDIA example. NVIDIA is front and center of that issue. They're making high-end AI semiconductor chips. They've been told by the Commerce Department they cannot do that anymore. They cannot sell them to China anymore. What do? They take the chip, dumb it down, and continue selling it to China. So you're seeing that. The other side of the equation, though, that's just market and that's large companies. The other side of the equation is as a manufacturing base and a supply chain. There you are seeing some adjustments, but you were seeing some adjustments before COVID and even before U.S.-China tensions. That adjustment had been taking place already, largely because of labor costs. And I'll just make a quick comment. Again, just because this is in the news, I mean, I think everybody saw the front page, Wall Street Journal, Apple is pulling out of China and, no longer going to make iPhones in China. Hold on. So that was a great headline. Everybody saw that article, especially because it was on the back of Zhengzhou, and what was happening there was horrific. That's iPhone City, which is where they make largely the iPhones. That supply chain shift, that is not news, actually. Apple had actually been looking at second suppliers for quite a long time and had actually already put a plant in India long before all of that happened, and Vietnam, of course. So my take on that is, yes, there was some reaction to Zhengzhou, that is obvious. But it's also true that, one, the trend had already been happening. Two, Apple actually has a lot of market issues in China. And so this is a very old, and actually I'm not disclosing any, I don't know about Apple, so I'm not in private conversations about that, but as an outsider, I would say it's very common practice to use these kinds of things as leverage in China. And what do they need leverage for? Well, China has long been putting pressure on Apple to change the way they market the iPhone in China. For example, they require that the FaceTime functionality be disabled, and also the AirDrop functionality. So this hurts Apple. It wouldn't surprise me, again, I'm just talking as an outsider, it wouldn't surprise me if they get some leverage off that. But I don't see Apple's hard stop, stopping manufacturing iPhones in China anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. So John, your turn. About a week ago, former president of China, Jiang Zemin, passed away. So I would say in the last 5-6 days, on the social media, there were overwhelming, talking about his accomplishment. And one of the significant one is about his visit to the United States back in 1997. And as a great leader, very dynamic leader, and very visionary, and dealt with a lot of difficulties between U.S.-China, even with the military conflict at that time, right? So I'm sure, John, you have a lot of story to share. John was the president of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, so that's the organization, between the two. But the question I have is that, now we have the 20th Party Congress. So many of our members are asking the question, say, it's really hard to read from that Congress meeting. So you can read it from two sides. Okay, I'm just going to be very blank. On one side, we talk about self-sustainability, internal circulation, and national security, and common prosperity, all those, right? So many of our members are very concerned that, does that mean China is going to go backward? So that's one question. On the other side, I have some data here. It's very interesting to see. So the Communist Party has a 205-member Central Committee. First time in the history that the Central Committee has more than about 40% of the leaders are from technical, science, and those kind of background. So they are basically professional expert. The last Central Committee, that percentage was 18%. So it's more than double. 81 out of the 205 in the Central Committee members are professional expert. And then you look at the level up, it's a Politburo. And instead of 25, now we have 24. They are the organization leading China. In the past, only 2 out of 25 are coming from the science technology space. Now it's 8 out of 24. So many people say, hey, this is a really good because now China is going to move forward with much more, opening and a much more, professional way. It's no longer run by politician, but more by scientists. So I just wanted to compare, and also look back when the Jiang Zemin's 13 years when he's running China. And what is your take on that? And what is your view about what could happen next year in China?
Well, thanks, Ben. You've teed up some very difficult questions. But first of all, I had the privilege of meeting Jiang Zemin on a number of occasions in China and the U.S., and also his colleague and close ally, Zhu Rongji, both of whom were extroverted and very dynamic people. They were fun to talk to. They had a sense of humor. And U.S.-China relations in those days, we had some very engaging exchanges. And I think if you look at the relationship the way it is now, yes, there's a certain amount of conviviality, but in terms of the real depth of exchange, it's not there. And that's got to change going forward. I think, we have governors and mayors here who know a little bit about politics, and you don't ride a bicycle. If politics is like a bicycle, it's difficult to ride it backwards, right? You got to go forward, and you're facing problems that may not fit into your geostrategic, theoretical framework. You've just got to make decisions. What do we do about COVID? What do we do about mRNA vaccines? How do we get this relationship with the U.S. back on a safe track again? How do we keep the foreign businesses convinced that we really want them? Because they're wondering, are we still welcome in China? These are all kind of practical questions. And if I had to guess, I would say that maybe not in 2023, because it's going to be a difficult year, and COVID is the big theme that's going to affect everything. But going forward, I think China's going to have to face some really difficult questions about reform. One of my friends is a guy named Bill Overholt at Harvard. When I was with Cargill, I gave his book, China, the Next Superpower, to every member of the executive committee of Cargill. This was in the 1990s. When nobody thought China was going to be a big superpower. And Bill now is saying, oh gosh, and he's coming out with a new book, China has to be careful not to get stuck in the middle income trap and end up, I'm sorry not to offend anybody, but end up like Mexico or the Philippines. What China needs is the reforms that will enable it to become a South Korea or a Singapore and so on. And so there's an agenda of things out there that could be done. And the question is, will the politics allow it, or will the real issues that China faces actually force those things to happen? And the final thing I'd say about the Chinese leaders that I've known in my career, they're practical people. And Kevin Rudd has written about Chairman Xi Jinping's adherence to ideology as being extremely important. Ideology is very important. But at the end of the day, he's the leader of a very complex system. And he has to make the decisions that are practical for China, in my opinion. Certainly, I hope that's the case.
Okay, thank you. So coming back to Professor Yan, and I know you're writing the book, right? For related with COVID.
Well, I have completed the manuscript.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you might want to change that because, as I say, China's COVID policy has changed very dramatically, I think. Although I'm not sure I'm reading right, because now people are saying starting from January 9th, we can all go to China. And we will be 0 quarantine plus the 3 days of stay home kind of sense. But anyway, I don't know whether it's true or not. But the interesting part is that I think you raised a good question, because a lot of our members are still concerned about, is that too quick and too easy? As you call, a lot of people are not vaccinated for flu, for COVID. And the vaccine may not be as effective. Although when I read the data, it looks pretty good, but it's still, it's a less than mRNA, vaccine. So, given the larger population, obviously there's anger, there are concerns. It's very nice to see Chinese government can take action that quickly, listen to the people, take it quickly, then change their policy. A lot of people say this is about a face issue. Clearly, it's not the case. So, which is good. But the question our member asked are, would that policy change be sustainable? I.e., after, the flu season is coming. So as soon as we get on the plane, we landed in China, now all of a sudden China's, is going to spread very quickly, and now the death rate go higher, and then China going to be locked down again. So obviously we don't know, but that's the question. So I'm asking you to comment on, is this a sustainable policy, or this is a testing? I mean, obviously it's all for people, nobody knows. And, and China is different from USA, and China has its own, situation to deal with. But for people to prepare for next year, can we travel to China? Can we be safe in China? Can we travel back without a problem? Those are the questions that we have to answer. So, please.
Yeah, first of all, about the travel, I saw the same little rumor about actually January 9th. So tonight, the National Health Commission will convene another press conference in Beijing, and it's likely that they'll address that because that's really the last major remaining issue that people were asking. And regardless of, because already after President Xi Jinping had visited Central Asia, there he already indicated, we should try to open more significantly internationally. So there have already been some adjustments in recent months, and my sense is they'll push on. The question then is actually, when the pandemic is spreading very rapidly, do you want to rush to go to China unless you have to, right? So sort of it's likely that you do want to assess the situation, because if the pandemic is really raging, clearly you're getting, even if travel is actually, you can flexibly arrange your travel, you may not be able to see the people you really want to see as easily, right? Just like when it spread through, for example, Chicago and so on. But I do think actually by next summer, things will look appreciably much better actually, so sort of in a way, given how fast this virus is spreading currently. So the second question, actually I want to also touch on what John mentioned about the MIA. In 2021, the Chinese government actually came up with the idea for a deal about the MIA. The deal was for Europe to approve a Chinese vaccine. So you approve a Chinese vaccine in Europe, we can approve yours, because Fosun had already signed a contract one day ahead of Pfizer to manufacture the MIA vaccine in China. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, the visits didn't happen last year, and at that point, actually, so sort of essentially China was doing so well, so there was no rush in finishing or actually completing the deal. And of course, then suddenly, when things turned dire in China, then the authorities decided, I don't want to be begging for the vaccine when people think that we actually really need it. So what has happened then, by now, however, as China is reopening, so just today, Europe has indicated, Germany has indicated that it's going to approve the Sinovac, CureVac vaccine in Europe, and that in Germany, and that opens the door for China to approve the MIA, BioNTech MIA vaccine in China. So it's going to be a political deal in a way, but it's also scientifically important. But is it going to be fast enough? That's the big challenge. So far, it's supposed to be available for foreigners in China, but in very limited dosage. And my sense is the problem is because the opening came faster than anticipated. They really had wanted to boost people better, actually. So sort of, so my sense is this approval is not going to be of much help in the short run, but it may be better for the next waves. Now, the final question that Ping asked is, is this actually, have we passed a point of no return in China? I think yes. This is actually, and the authorities, the health leaders, they knew once you begin to switch this on in terms of allowing the virus to spread, especially by largely suspending, for example, mass PCR testing. So people are freely mingling. You can no longer, even if the government wants to, it can no longer carry out contact tracing. In fact, Omicron essentially beats contact tracing for epidemiological purposes. So that's why they engage in mass lockdowns, because they couldn't really trace easily. And now, essentially, I do think we have passed the point of no return. And also because of the incubation, the process, so by the time the ability to bear the situation becomes strained, by then it would be the situation simply could not actually be, people cannot be asking to go back anymore. So that's basically the situation.
Thank you. So if I translate what the professor just said, go buy your ticket. And but my recommendation will be probably wait until the Chinese New Year is over, because it's just very difficult to travel in China during the Chinese New Year. And also that will be a good test to see how that, really the COVID will be under the control.
If I could add, now the forecast for Beijing is that it's going to peak actually probably somewhere around the end of this month for the city of Beijing. But for the rest of the many other cities, though, I mean, Beijing was so well guarded until recently, and then it was essentially, but now they have really loosened up so much. So it's just spreading so rapidly. So my hunch is, especially 2 weeks after the Lunar New Year. Lunar New Year falls on January 21st. So 2 weeks, so essentially we are talking about early February. That's actually February, so sort of the latter half of January, first half of February may be especially tough.
I'm going then, so I'll let you know.
I've actually got my ticket as well at the same time.
you better be in hurry, because they will be sold out very quickly. And sorry, I collect about 6 sheets of the questions. I went through 1.5 sheet, but nevertheless, I think we want to open to the audience and to see anybody has question, and then we will have, and I have more questions for our panelists as well. Please, anybody.
First of all, on behalf of U.S. Heartland China Association, I want to thank Ms. Niping and the panelists for this wonderful discussion. As you heard from the mayors who already talked, there's a great warmth, right? Very different from what here at the national level. So between the people, we want things to work out, and would love to hear from you guys. What are the things that this community, business, politicians, and students, and what are the things we can do, because we want a positive, productive relationship. Thank you.
Well, this man Pini is responsible for an awful lot of student exchanges back and forth, personally, through his foundation, and that, more of that has to happen, right? Yeah. And we need to do, America needs to do a better job, I think, of reaching out to the Chinese students who are here. That's a lot of people, 300,000 people who are here. Check with your universities in your hometowns. Do they have a program to welcome these students and to help them get integrated? I used to head the U.S.-China Strong Foundation, and I wasn't aware of very many. Obviously, students get to know each other, and that's all great, but let's do a little bit better on that score. And then as business people, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. We need to find opportunities to keep trade going. We have $750 billion of two-way trade right now between the U.S. and China. That's still a lot. There's a lot of win-win stuff going on. Let's continue that. Let's be smart about making sure that our efforts don't fall on fallow ground. We need to do more things together cooperatively.
Yeah, this year we're going to have a new record for the U.S.-China trade in terms of dollar amount.
Yeah, if I could just add something to that. I think that's a great question, and I think we've got the right people in the room here to hear this. I think one of the issues from my perspective, and what do I know about America, actually? I've been living in China for the last 2 decades, so I'm actually still learning. I'm learning what's going on here in America. But from my perspective, it seems to me that, that voters in the United States, citizens in the United States, have become anti-trade. They've become anti-trade, they've become anti-globalization. And let me just give you a little anecdote, actually. One of the previous ambassadors, Ambassador Locke, during the Obama administration, they were out pushing the TPP. And Ambassador Locke came to us at the American Chamber in Shanghai, and he was really frustrated because he was saying, guys, I'm trying to push TPP, and in America, they're just not getting it. They don't understand, they don't appreciate the value of trade. And he actually told us a story. He's from the state of Washington, of course, Gary Locke, and he said he's literally down on the dock talking to longshoremen about TPP, and these guys are anti-trade. Where do they think those ships are going? Are those ships going to Iowa? So it was really frustrating for the Obama administration, and I think later administrations as well. And the problem here is that China, U.S.-China trade is so important that trade has become so closely identified with China. So if they're anti-trade, they're anti-China. I think that's a big part of it, and I think what we need is the leadership to kind of explain that equation to their communities so that they understand the positive connection between trade and American jobs and the economy here. So that's just my perspective on it.
And a quick thing, read Secretary Raimondo's speech to people at MIT. She lays it out beautifully.
If I may add, I teach a class on Chinese foreign policy, but I emphasize to my students, even during the bitter periods of the Cold War between the US and USSR, there was actually a lot of effort. You have to build up protocols for interactions to keep things stable, in fact. And of course, that's without a lot of the trade, a lot of the interactions that we have today. So we are not exactly certainly returning to the Cold War, number one. Number two is a lot of the relations are very strained because of the trade war and also because of the pandemic psychological aspects that really made the two sides fight so bitterly on Twitter and so on. Now that both countries have are going through the processes of the pandemic and so on, and I think actually this is a good moment to actually look at the overall picture and try to find places where we can do better. And especially, I do think from the student perspective, for example, it's very important we do have more American students go to China.
Okay, I don't want to take care of Steve's job. So as I said, let's focus on the business because the geopolitical and others is going to be the next panel.
Thank you, Ping, for moderating such a wonderful business panel. So I'm an investment manager, so I like to also focus on the business side. I'm Chris Lee. So seeing that there is a bit of a disconnect between the business community and perhaps the political community in terms of how the rhetoric has become very unhealthy. So if you look at President Joe Biden, he has become more hawkish, actually, in his, I think, language towards China. But at the same time, we still see Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and everybody else investing in China, right? So we see that I think quite a number of wealthy Americans definitely benefit from the trade and also the business activities. But my question to the business panel here is, what can we do that will actually benefit the middle class, the working class, the average Joe on the street, so that the politicians can actually keep their constituents happy? So I'm just posing this general question to the business panel here to see if you have any idea that you can potentially share with the audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a huge disconnect between the business community and the political environment. And this is very, very frustrating, especially for those of us who've been kind of over in China and working on it. Again, as I began the discussion about the enthusiasm and that cooperative spirit that was so infectious in the early days, if you had told me then that we would be sitting here today with our governments at each other's throats, I just wouldn't have believed you. It is just incredible how this arc has come maybe full circle. So yes, there's a huge disconnect, and I don't have the answer for you, but I can tell you who is working really hard on that. And again, I want to congratulate CGCC for bringing the right people in the room, because you've done a remarkable job getting 3 ambassadors to come and speak to us at the next panel. And I just want to say about these particular 3 ambassadors have spent an enormous amount of time with the American business community in China. These are the guys on both sides, on the US side and the Chinese side, that can be the glue that bridges that gap. And this is an environment in which the space for that conversation is extremely narrow in both countries. It's hard in the United States to have an open conversation about China and US-China policy. I can tell you, my last trip to Washington, D.C., I was in the offices of a United States senator, and I was in a shouting match with these people about U.S. policy. We were shouting at each other. It's incredible. Well, actually, I was more on the receiving end of the shouting. But and vice versa in China, the space for open conversation is very narrow. We all know that censorship has always been there since the early days. But in the last 3 to 5 years, it's become increasingly difficult to have open conversations in China. Yet, China's ambassador to the United States, Qin Gang, he's spent an enormous amount of time listening to not just the American business community, which he did. He came to Shanghai. He spent an entire day with us in our companies, hearing some difficult messages. But his ears are open, he's listening, and then we've been sort of watching him in the last year as he's doing his work here in the United States, taking the discussion directly to the American people. So that gives me hope. I think you're right that there's a huge gap here, but there is reason for optimism. There are a lot of people actually working on exactly that.
Yeah, so I'm in a tough spot, but I just want to say one comment. I was very touched by the mayor's panel, before us, and clearly, and we can debate whether we're a minority or majority in terms of U.S.-China relationship, right? By large sense, we say we're not representing the mainstream. The mainstream is on the newspapers. But on the other side, there's 4 mayors at least, and I was very, very, very touched. The warm welcome, the sincerity, and at the end, it's all people to people. So from that point of view, my comment to you is that let's travel to China. Let's see that. This COVID policy change is a perfect example what the 4 people could mean and should mean, right? It's not about the face. It's about practical manner. I like what John said. It's a practical issue. And to get a student come to the United States, get our business leader and the political leader travel to China, let the people start to talk. And then, like those mayors' discussion, should take a place in many other places, not just here, not just today. If we do that, I'm sure we're going to build much strong foundation for the mainstream. Otherwise, we'll let the mainstream slide into very different directions. So that's my quick comment. I just want to thank you for bringing all the mayors here, as well. And we have 2 mayors want to. Yeah.
You can repeat the question. I'm wondering about the implications of the CHIPS Act relative to both economies.
It's changing the landscape. The IRA and the CHIPS Act is bringing a lot of investment into the United States. We're doing industrial economic planning now in this country, and it's changing. the world we live in. We're just beginning to see how this is evolving.
Yeah.
You know, you came up with, my head is spinning around the disinformation that would lead to a longshoreman not believing in trade. And we deal with it as mayors in our cities, but all politics are local. So when it comes to how do we find the right metrics to begin to share with our population about this impact? I mean, I see it on a global basis, I see it on a national basis, I sometimes see it in state metrics. But it's very difficult for us unless we're able to break it down to our cities. And yes, we do provide powerful relationship with our residents. I mean, they literally, we are the executive of that city. But if we don't have the appropriate information in order to help guide this discussion, we end up probably falling prey to the disinformation as well. And so it's very difficult when I actually was coming and preparing myself, thinking about, you know, well, where are the investors? Where are they located? Are they in my county? Are they in my city? You know, what relationships do I need to bring to this conversation? The information that I had to research was very sketchy. And so I need to have metrics. I need to make sure that we have the information in order for us to do what you asked. Because if we are going to be able to use our, let's call it juice, we need to make sure that we have the ability to do so. So that's primarily where I think we can begin.
Thank you, Mayor. I can give you two suggestions. One is the U.S.-China Business Council annually puts out numbers that show jobs created in the U.S. by U.S.-China trade. So all that stuff is out there, and they break it down by state and community. So U.S.-China Business Council. Municipality? I'm not sure. I think, no, I don't.
It's only by state.
It's probably,
yeah,
by state. Okay. Mayor, I don't know where you'd go for that. Steve Orland's president of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, the Rhodium Group, he works with them. He's going to have ideas too on where you can get some of that information, but it's out there.
We're also working on why China matters the heartland for each state. Mayor, we're happy to work with you to provide data that will help you.
Yeah, sorry, you know, not only you raise your hand, as I say, I have all the questions collected, but you know, if we're going to talk through those, we're going to be here for the next couple of days. So anyway, I think our time is up. So first of all, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And I think we all agree that at the end, you know, let's go buy the ticket. And I'm glad that there's no airline company is our sponsor for this gala, so I can see that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Penn. It was very nice. Now, where's the ambassador? I don't want to get too far ahead of these guys.